Nobody came to my 40th birthday. Not my father. Not my stepsister. Not the 6 coworkers who'd RSVP'd 3 weeks earlier on a paper invitation with a little gold 40 foiled on the front. By 8 o'clock on a Saturday in June, I was standing in my own backyard on Larchmont Drive next to 30 folding chairs I'd rented from a party store on Cleveland Avenue, and every single one of them was empty. I didn't cry. I want to say that up front, because crying isn't actually what happened that night. What happened was quieter than that, and it took me 4 more days to understand it. 4 days to learn that my stepmother had spent 3 weeks on the phone, calling almost everyone I loved, making absolutely sure none of them walked through my gate. Here's what I didn't know yet. Standing there in a birthday dress with a sheet cake nobody would eat, the empty chairs weren't the cruelty. The empty chairs were cover. 11 days later, sitting across a card table from an estate attorney I'd hired without telling a soul, I'd understand exactly what my stepmother had been trying to keep me from noticing, and exactly what she needed me to sign before anyone who loved me could stop me. Welcome back to Quiet Reckoning, where we tell calm, true-to-life stories about the families that ask too much and the people who finally stop paying. If you've ever had to defend your own birthday at a table that should have loved you for free, this one's for you. Stick around and subscribe if you want more of these. My name is Mara Hale. I'm a structural engineer, licensed in the state of Ohio, and I've spent 17 years reading load paths for a living, figuring out where a building's weight actually goes before it fails somewhere you didn't expect. I mention that only because it turned out to matter. I read stress patterns the way some people read faces, and I should have recognized one forming in my own family a full year before I finally did. That Saturday, my husband Daniel had strung 200 feet of cafe lights through our maple trees the weekend before, testing them every night after dinner like a kid with a new toy. Our daughter Lily, 15, had made a playlist. I'd ordered a half-sheet cake from the Kroger on State Street, yellow with raspberry filling, because that's what I actually like, not what anyone assumed I'd like. We'd invited 41 people. My father, Richard, my stepmother, Celeste, my stepsister, Whitney, 6 people from Bell Harbor Structural Group, where I'm a senior associate, neighbors, Lily's godmother, people I'd known for 20 years. By 6:30, exactly 2 guests had arrived, Daniel's parents, who lived 40 minutes away and had left extra early just in case of traffic, his mother said, though there wasn't any. By 7, nothing. I checked my phone. No text explaining a delay. Nothing from my father. I told myself it was the highway construction on 71. I told myself people run late. By 7:40, Lily asked the question in the flat, careful voice teenagers use when they already suspect the answer will hurt someone. Mom, is anyone else coming? I want you to hold on to how normal that question sounded, because it wasn't normal at all. 41 invitations. 2 guests. I'd catered for 40. We ate cake standing up in the kitchen. Daniel, Lily, Daniel's parents, and me, while 30 folding chairs sat outside catching moths under the string lights. Nobody said much. Daniel kept refilling everyone's water like it might fix something. I kept checking my phone, watching the little screen stay dark, and doing what I always do when something doesn't add up. I started running the numbers in my head. 41 invitations sent by mail 3 weeks out. A follow-up text 9 days out. 6 confirmed replies from my side of the family alone. And not one single person from that side had so much as texted to cancel. People don't all go quiet on the same night by accident. I'd learned that lesson once already, at a different table, a long time before this one, though it would take me a few more days to remember exactly where. That night, after Lily went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and made a list. Not of who hadn't come, of who hadn't even bothered to lie about why. To understand why I wasn't as surprised as I should have been, you need to go back 31 years, to the house on Larchmont Drive where I actually grew up, the same street, different house, for doors down from the one Daniel and I bought years later, which tells you something about how hard I was trying to build a life that felt like mine instead of borrowed. My mother, and died when I was 9, breast cancer, diagnosed late, gone in 14 months. I remember her mostly in pieces now, the smell of the drugstore perfume she wore even in the hospital, the way she used to let me stay up to watch the 10 o'clock news, just so I'd fall asleep against her on the couch. I remember her mother, my grandmother Joan, moving into our spare room for that whole last year, cooking casseroles nobody ate and answering the phone so my father wouldn't have to. 2 years after the funeral, my father married Celeste. She had a daughter, Whitney, 3 years younger than me, from a marriage that had ended before I ever met either of them. I want to be fair to Celeste in one specific way. She never hit me, never screamed, never did anything a neighbor could have called the police about. What she did was smaller than that, and harder to explain to anyone who hadn't lived inside it. She sorted my father's house into 2 categories, things that were practical and things that were special, and I learned by the time I was 10 exactly which category I'd been filed under. Here's the phrase that ran under our whole childhood like a support beam nobody could see. That's more your speed. My 12th birthday fell 6 weeks before Whitney's. Celeste sat me down at the kitchen table that October, apologetic in a way that somehow made it worse, and told me we couldn't afford 2 big to-dos so close together. Whitney's party was already half paid for, a rented bounce house, a magician, $40 a head for pizza. Mine would be a family dinner instead. That's more your speed anyway, honey, she said. You've never been one for a fuss. I had never once said I wasn't one for a fuss. Nobody had ever asked. I want you to remember that phrase. It comes back. By 13, I'd stopped requesting anything because I'd done the math myself. A quiet kid costs less than a kid who wants a magician. I told myself I was being mature about it. I didn't let myself notice, not for years, that being mature and being priced are sometimes the exact same thing wearing different clothes. The one person who never once filed me under practical was my grandmother Joan. Every Sunday at 4 o'clock, without fail, from the year my mother died until the year Joan herself passed, she called. Not texted, called. On an actual landline for the first decade of it, then a flip phone she refused to upgrade. She asked about school, about boys, about whatever engineering competition I'd entered that spring. When I was 14 and crying in her kitchen because Whitney had gotten a car for her 16th birthday, and I'd been told mine would be whatever's reliable and used, since practical is what matters, Joan put down her dish towel, took my chin in her hand the way grandmothers do in every version of this story because it's the truest thing grandmothers actually do, and said, "You are not the practical one, Mara. You are the one who's going to be fine no matter what they hand you. There's a difference, and one day you'll be glad it's you." Then she made me a grilled cheese, cut diagonally, the way I liked it, and let me stay up too late watching a movie neither of us finished. Joan died 3 years ago, the spring I turned 37. I gave the eulogy. It was the only one that mentioned who she'd actually been instead of what she left behind, though at the time, I had no idea what she left behind at all. About 6 weeks after the funeral, my father and Celeste quietly refinanced the house on Larchmont, upgraded the kitchen, and started talking, a little too often, about how tight money had been 4 years now, if we're honest. I didn't think much of it. I was grieving. But there was a sentence Joan had said to me on one of our last Sunday calls, her voice thin over the line, that I filed away without understanding it at all. "You won't have to ask anyone for anything once you're 40, sweetheart," she told me. "Your mother made sure of that a long time ago. I just made sure nobody could quietly undo it." I thought she meant it as encouragement, a grandmother telling her granddaughter to be strong. It would be 6 months before my 40th birthday, going through old mortgage paperwork for an entirely different reason, that I'd learned she had meant it literally and in writing and notarized. The year before I turned 40, my family got quiet around me in a way that wasn't the comfortable kind. Group texts that used to get an answer in an hour started taking 3 days. I got left off the planning thread for Thanksgiving, then got a slightly surprised text asking why I hadn't brought a side dish nobody had told me to bring. Whitney, meanwhile, started using a phrase in the family group chat she'd never bothered with before, immediate family only, as in, the lake house sleeps 6, so let's keep this trip immediate family only this year. As in, you understand. I understood completely. I just didn't have the paperwork yet to know why the temperature had dropped so fast, in the exact same season, for no reason anyone offered out loud. I'd left home the week I turned 18 with 2 duffel bags and an acceptance letter to Ohio State's engineering program that I'd filled out myself, at the library, on a computer with a 15-minute time limit. Nobody drove me to campus. I worked the overnight shift at a CVS pharmacy counter and took morning classes, then transferred into structural engineering, then spent 4 more years getting licensed while waitressing on weekends. I paid for every bit of it. I mention that not because it makes me special. Plenty of people do exactly this, but because it matters for what comes later. Nobody handed me a single thing, and by 39, I'd built a life that didn't need anyone to. I made senior associate at Bell Harbor the year I turned 36. I married Daniel, an architect I'd met arguing about a beam specification on a job site, which is a very specific kind of love story but an honest one. We had Lily. I had exactly the kind of life a person builds with her own hands when nobody built one for her, and the joke of it, the one I didn't laugh at for years, was this. I could read a load-bearing wall the way some people read a room. I could look at a structure and tell you exactly where it would fail first. But I could not, for the life of me, look at my own family and admit what I already knew was buckling. Quick pause here, because if you're the kind of person who quietly keeps a mental list before you ever say a word out loud, you're going to want to see where this goes. Hit subscribe now. The next part is where those phone calls start making sense. 6 months before my birthday, I wasn't looking for any of this. Daniel and I were refinancing our mortgage, and I needed an old document, my mother's death certificate, for a life insurance beneficiary form the bank wanted cleaned up. I drove to the Franklin County Recorder's office on a Tuesday during my lunch break, the way you do any other errand, and requested the file. That's when I saw a name I didn't recognize sitting next to my mother's. The Ann Whitfield Callaway Trust, established the year after my mother died, funded by her life insurance payout and administered, notarized, and filed by my grandmother Joan. I'm going to tell you exactly what an estate paralegal would tell you, because it's what I eventually paid one to confirm. My mother's life insurance had paid out a little over $40,000. Instead of handing that money to my father outright, Joan, using her legal authority as the trust's original settler, had it placed with a bank trustee, Meridian Trust and Savings, with a clean, specific set of terms. My father and, after the marriage, Celeste, could draw an annual custodial allowance for my upbringing. That arrangement, the document said, would automatically terminate the month I turned 40, at which point the full remainder, now grown over 3 decades of quiet investment, to just over $211,000, would transfer outright to me. Not through anyone's will, not subject to anyone's signature, held by a trustee my father and stepmother had never controlled and never would. I did not call my father and confront him with it. That's not the tool I trust, and I've drafted enough legal paperwork professionally to know exactly how a satisfying phone call turns into evidence for the other side later. What I had instead was process, so I used it. I took a personal day, drove the recorder's file to an estate attorney named Paula Grant with zero connection to my family, and paid her out of my own savings to confirm what I suspected. She confirmed all of it within a week. The custodial allowance had, in fact, been drawn every single year without exception, including years, I'd later learn, when it covered a great deal more than my actual expenses ever had. I asked Paula one more thing. Was there any way my father or Celeste could still touch that money before the transfer date? She told me the honest answer. Not without my signature on something. The trust itself was locked, but a person, she said carefully, can always be talked into signing things that feel like family instead of paperwork. I didn't know yet how right she was about to be. 2 weeks after that meeting, my phone lit up with Celeste's name, and her voice was 3 degrees warmer than it had been in over a year. "Honey," she said, and she only ever called me honey when she wanted something. "I was thinking I'd help plan your 40th this year. Do it properly, for once." Every instinct I'd built in 17 years of reading structures that were about to fail told me the exact same thing. This is too neat. A woman who'd never once organized so much as a Sunday dinner without complaint was suddenly volunteering to help throw the one party where, according to a piece of paper she didn't know I'd already read, the money she'd been quietly managing for 31 years was scheduled to stop belonging to her family entirely. I said yes, sweetly, the way I'd been trained to my whole life. Then I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, doing what I do. I thought about the trust. I thought about the phrase immediate family only showing up in the group chat that exact season. And I thought about a sentence my grandmother had said to me 2 years before she died. I didn't call anyone to ask questions. I made a few calls of my own instead. Quiet ones, the kind you make when you've decided you're not going to be ambushed. I won't tell you yet who I called. I'll tell you the rule I live by instead, the one Joan never said out loud but taught me anyway, When a person who's never been warm suddenly turns generous, someone at the table is about to lose something. I just made sure this time it wasn't going to be me without my knowing it first. The morning after the empty backyard, I started making calls of a different kind. I called Diane Foster first, my next-door neighbor, mostly to ask if she'd noticed anything odd, since her kitchen window looked straight into my backyard and she'd RSVP'd weeks earlier. Diane hesitated in a way I recognized immediately, the particular pause of someone realizing, in real time, that she's about to say something she assumed I already knew. "Oh, didn't Celeste tell you?" she said. "She called me, gosh, maybe 2.5 weeks ago. Said you two had talked it over and decided to keep this one low-key. Said something small was more your speed this year, and you'd rather everyone just send a card instead of making a fuss. More your speed." I sat with that phrase for a full 10 seconds before I could make myself keep talking. I called Priya Nair next, my closest friend at Bell Harbor, who'd RSVP'd the same week. She bought Lily a birthday card too, because that's who Priya is. She confirmed it almost word for word. Celeste had called her directly, not texted, called, and said Mara wasn't feeling up for a big to-do this year and would really rather people not make it a thing. I called my father last, and he answered on the 4th ring, sounding tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He told me there'd been a family emergency with Whitney, car trouble, something about her lease falling through, and that they'd had to handle it that night and simply hadn't had a chance to call. I let him finish. Then I texted Whitney directly, just to ask if she was all right. She wrote back within 4 minutes. "What emergency?" I was at trivia night with Jake till 11. Why? I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that text came in. Not angry yet. That came later, and even then it never got loud. Mostly what I felt was the specific, cold click of a lock turning somewhere I couldn't see, followed almost immediately by the realization that I already had the key. Here's what actually happened after that dinner, because I know the appetite for this part, and I want to be honest instead of dramatic. I didn't sign the advisory agreement. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten anyone with a lawsuit, because I didn't need to. The trust did exactly what my grandmother built it to do 31 years earlier. On the date she'd chosen, the custodial allowance to my father and Celeste terminated automatically, and the full remainder transferred to me through Meridian Trust and Savings, untouched by any form anyone had tried to get me to sign at that kitchen table. Whitney's bridge loan never happened. Without the $60,000 they'd hoped to route through that agreement, her boutique closed by August, and I'm told she's working retail again, which I say without satisfaction, only as fact. My father and Celeste, without the annual allowance they've been drawing for 3 decades, an allowance that had, 4 years, quietly covered far more than my actual upbringing ever had to refinance the Larchmont house again, this time to shrink it instead of upgrade it. The story of that empty backyard traveled through my family, and then past it, the way these things do. The version where I was simply too busy for my own birthday never quite held up, because Diane and Priya had already told half the neighborhood a different one. The one where a woman spent 3 weeks on the phone making sure her stepdaughter turned 40 completely alone. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. I just stopped answering calls that weren't apologies, and let the silence be the boundary, which is the only kind of boundary that actually holds. My father texted me 3 weeks later. For words, I should have said something. No name signed. No follow-up. I read it twice and didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because some sentences only matter when they cost the person something to say out loud, at the table, while it's still happening, not 3 weeks later from a safe distance, once the consequence has already landed. I spent my actual 40th birthday 12 days late, in the same backyard, with far fewer chairs. Daniel, Lily, Priya, who drove over unannounced the Sunday after that dinner with a store-bought cake and an apology she didn't know me but gave anyway, and Joan's oldest friend, a woman named Vivian, who'd known my mother since they were girls, who showed up with a photo of an at 17 I'd never seen before and said, "Your grandmother would want you to know. She planned this for you a long time before any of them figured out what it meant." I administer risk for a living. I spend my days calculating exactly how much weight a structure can hold before something gives. And here's what I'll tell anyone who's ever had to defend a birthday, a boundary, or their own name at a table that should have loved them for free. The people who only reach for you once the numbers make sense were never actually holding you up in the first place. You were holding yourself up the whole time, and they were simply standing close enough to take credit for it. Some people don't come back because they missed you. They come back because they finally noticed what you're worth. And I think the harder, quieter question, the one worth sitting with after a story like this one, isn't whether you'd let them back in. It's this: if the people who stayed away for free suddenly show up once you're expensive, what exactly would you be forgiving? And who would it actually be for? If this story hits somewhere true for you, type the word shares in the comments below. And if you want more calm, true-to-life stories about the families that ask too much and the people who finally stop paying, subscribe to Quiet Reckoning. I'll see you in the next one.